Hi, and welcome to Chapter 2, Objective 3, where we're going to look at our first model, which is to draw and explain the circular flow model. Now, the circular flow model is important in economics. It serves the backbone for the macroeconomic course. And what we do is we start with that model and work our way upward. The circular flow model also provides context for the microeconomic course because we take the circular flow model and work our way downward, talking about a specific firm in an industry or a particular household. It's where we derive demand and supply in microeconomics. And the whole picture of the model is where we derive things like gross domestic product, monetary policy, and so on in macroeconomics. So as you can see, it's a pretty important model. It's not very complicated, but it does, again, provide a really good touchstone that we will revisit many times throughout these courses. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into your first model, the circular flow diagram. So let me share my screen with you. Okay. So here, as I said, we're going to look at the circular flow model. And what we're going to do is two things, two big objectives. I want you to be able to draw this, and I want you to be able to explain why it's important. So I also want you to draw your attention to, on the first test, many people will get questions that say draw and label the circular flow diagram. A lot of students will draw the diagram, but they'll forget the labeling. So make sure that you label it as well. Okay, so what is the circular flow diagram? It's really a visual of what happens in an economy. This is our definition of a circular flow diagram, how dollars flow through markets among households and firms. Now, a market here does not mean a financial market. We're going to talk about two different markets, as you can see down here. We're talking about the market for goods and services, which all of us, all households, are interacting in all the time. Anyone who buys anything, remember, is a household. The two decision makers in our model are firms and households. The goal of firms is to produce goods and services. The goal of households is to maximize utility, meaning getting the most amount for their money. So kind of buying goods and services, but also ensuring that they make fair wages and some other things that we're going to look at. So the first thing that we encounter is this idea of factors of production. And we did talk about that in chapter 1, but I want to revisit it for just a moment. There are 6, but we are going to stick with 3 basic factors of production for this course. The first factor of production is land. And by land, we mean maybe physical land, real estate, but we also mean things like natural resources, minerals that can be mined from that land. Oil would be considered land. The second factor of production is labor. And in macroeconomics, we talk more later on in later chapters about the difference between labor and human capital, which is trained labor. So in terms of labor, this is the ability that households have to sell their time, and then they get compensated for it in some way. The last factor of production, if you remember, is capital. And by capital, we mean anything that we use to produce a good or a service. Remember, capital does not mean money, but it means things like machinery, things like new houses, inventories would all be considered capital. Okay, let's move on. So essentially, what firms want to do is to produce goods and services. So firms purchase. And remember, in a capitalistic society, who owns these factors of production or inputs? The owners are households. So what happens is households will sell land, labor, and capital to firms. Firms will in turn use entrepreneurial ability to produce these goods and services. Households, again, owning the factor of production, what they do is they sell these factors of production to firms or businesses. And in exchange for each factor of production, they're compensated in some way. So if a household sells land, firms compensate them with rent. If households sell labor, firms compensate that with wages. If households perhaps make a piece of machinery that is included in a larger part, so for example, maybe a sole proprietorship that's owned by a household sells products to GM, then the factor of production is capital, again, owned by households, and then GM would provide them with profit. So this is the corresponding revenue streams, rent, wages, and profit that firms pay to households. What you should be understanding at this point is there's a very reciprocal relationship. There's two arrows here intentionally because firms need households and households need firms. Okay, so when we look at this, and I would like to draw a very simplified model of a circular flow. So on this side, again, we have households. And in a capitalistic society, we know households have the private property rights, so they own land, they own labor, and they own capital. Okay. Households then sell the land, the labor, and capital to businesses. So over here we have businesses. Okay. So what essentially is taking place is for the market for factors of production is that the households are selling land, labor, and capital to businesses. Businesses, in turn, are receiving, households are receiving a corresponding revenue stream, and that corresponding revenue stream, as we just spoke about, is rent, wages, and profit. Now, this is the labeling part I was talking about just a moment ago. So what do businesses do with these factors of production that they have purchased? They combine them together with the fourth factor of production, entrepreneurial ability. Okay, so using land, labor, and capital, they combine them together with entrepreneurial ability and they get goods and services. They then make those goods and services available to households. How are they able to buy them? Because this revenue from the rent, wages, and profit is coming into households. Households then are taking that money and exchanging it for goods and services. So we say in the market for goods and services, firms sell the product, the goods and service, and households buy it. In the markets for factors of production, land, labor, and capital, firms buy it and households sell them. And again, that's because of our private property rights. Here's a little more complex model, the model that you will see in your text. But again, many times on the test, I might just not put anything in here and say, okay, which one represents A, B, or C, that kind of thing. Remember that the red line represents the flow of inputs and outputs. Okay, so again, the households are selling the factors of production of land, labor, and capital, right? Which become factors of production, selling them to firms. Then they go through this goods and services, and then there's the market for goods and services. Households then are able to take the rent, wages and profit, which comes in to households in the form of money, and exchange them for goods and services. So again, it doesn't matter which model that you use as long as please remember to label, okay? And also just really important, that reciprocal nature between households and firms. Households need firms to buy products and services and to supply products and services, and households need firms to get income to buy those goods and services. So it's a very important relationship that happens between firms and households. Okay, so as you can see, this was a very simplified model. And in this simplified model, there are many pieces that we didn't include, things like government, things like banks, um, other countries around the world. But we wanted to keep it simple so that would give you a good understanding of basically the importance of the reciprocal relationship between businesses and households. Now, our next model is the production possibilities frontier, which is a model that illustrates opportunity cost. It is difficult for some, but we're going to start this model in chapter 2, discuss it, calculate it actually, and then we're going to further that model in chapter 3 when we talk about interdependence and gains for trade. Please be patient with yourself in chapter 3 because many students share with me it's one of the harder chapters that they encounter. So you're not alone if it's not coming easy for you. Okay, until next time, thank you.